everybody. For the sake of time and me being long-winded, I'm going to do my best to go ahead and get started and kick us off this morning. Thank you all so much for coming back. I think we met all of you on what week? Monday? I don't even know what day it is. As you can see, Jim and I had an opportunity to spend some time in the community and make purchases here in Trenton, and obviously we both have really good taste. Keith actually is also wearing something he bought here in town. So we had a really great day.
I'm a brother from a different mother.
So what we're going to do today is we're going to give you some recommendations and just kind of maybe some next steps and just some fresh ways of looking at things. You are an organization that's 30 plus years old, but you're also an organization that has this kind of new infusion of energy and kind of maybe a new approach to handling some issues and topics. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about the Main Street world is that we're constantly innovating, and although we have this 4-point approach, there's also a lot of energy there, and you can never deny the power of a community that has truly brought their citizens in to the world of economic development. And I love this idea of this grassroots economic development. So we're going to talk a little this morning. I'm going to start off and talk about some of the marketing, branding, and kind of promotion recommendations for you all to think about. Then I'm going to hand it over to Jim. He's going to talk a little bit about some of the economic vitality observations and some tools and tactics to employ. And then Pete will wrap it up with kind of a primer for the next visit, and then talking about next steps. So that's kind of what the morning will look like. So what I always like to do when I start is I like to look at all the different identities that exist in the community. And honestly, on the scale, I typically go into a community and there is a whole lot of bad, if I'm being honest. Your community has a lot of good stuff. It's professional, but a lot of the stuff, it's just all in a vacuum. You know, and I don't mean that in like a, you should have done it. That's the way it typically works. But you see this stuff and virtually none of it relates to one another. Now, I will say the top left corner, you every now and then you come across like a phrase that might have seemed right at the time, and then in looking at it, you're like, I'm not sure if we really want to say historic Trenton. Okay, moving on. You know, it's like moving forward, yeah, moving on. It's kind of like, yeah, we're done with this, we're moving on. So I think that there's some really, really good, solid foundation there. Now, we had a conversation on Monday about colors. Talked a little bit about, we've got the gold and black from our high school. There's inherent and deposited pride there. We've got a red and black from college. There's also pride there. So how do we kind of stitch those things together? But as we really kind of focus in, you know, I took inspiration from this historic postcard that I found, and I really think that having this this yelling child is really a good basis for. No, again, in doing the research, you kind of look for things, and it's always shocking how we used to tell our community stories. That was an actual postcard that people sent. So there's your historic representation. Welcome to Trenton. Now, again, in going through and finding things, there were a lot of different components. Obviously, we have this newer Main Street Trenton logo. If you were here on Tuesday, you might have been offended by my criticism of state profiles with stars on your location, because that's exactly what you did. But I want to be honest, this logo's fine. You know, from a world of design, it's simple, it's got good typeface selection, and it's doing some things very well. And we've seen it designed and then implemented. You know, everything from signage, it worked. We've seen integration into marketing, it worked. We saw integration into products, it worked. So you're doing some things right, but it wasn't part of a larger system. It was just kind of a self-contained, this is a logo for this organization. And then I also came across the Downtown Trenton logo, which I think was featured in a newspaper article about the 30th anniversary of TDIA. All right, well, so that, I mean, let's be honest, it's it's a generic skyline. So it's not anybody's place. But, you know, the thing that's interesting about this logo is it does everything that we typically do in the Main Street world. Let's slap a skyline and a lamppost, because that's historic, right? Nailed it. And the thing that we really want to talk about today is we want to talk about, you need both of these components. You need this component for your organization. You also need this component for your place. Now, before I get in too deep, I do want to say very early on I made an observation and a quick decision. I didn't want to create a logo for downtown Trenton for you all. And the reason I didn't is because I feel like your community is simply too small. It's not fair to your business community to go through and say, we're going to give this beautiful marketing tool, but it's only for downtown, nobody else can use it. That's divisive in a community this size. Y'all don't need that. But there's a beautiful way to solve that problem, and that solution is historic Trenton. It's a value that the community as a whole shares, but it's also an attribute that can only be experienced downtown. So in doing that, when we kind of talk about this, you're going to see this development of this historic Trenton brand. That's a destination brand that is intended to be shared with all, shared with our event organizers, shared with our business community. And then we're going to see that Main Street brand develop. Does that make sense to everybody? Yes, no, okay. Well, if it doesn't, you'll see pictures and maybe it'll be clear, right? So I talked about the brand Toolbox. That brand Toolbox is really made up of 4 main components: our colors, our typeface, our graphics, and our message. So we start with colors. Colors are oftentimes, they're some of the easiest and hardest at the same time to deal with. Here you had kind of this pre-established things were gold and black or red and black. Oh, and we're Green Hills, so we've kind of mixed green in every now and then. But one of the big things that anytime we talked about agriculture, we saw an automatic kind of pride trigger. You know, we know that we are a community that is tied to an agrarian culture that surrounds us. Because of that, how do you tie in agriculture? How do you tie in a connection to the land? That's not complicated. It's blues and greens. You know, that's just kind of the way that it works. So what I did was I simply expanded that palette out. I kept the gold and the red as our signature differentiators, and then I incorporated 2 blues and 2 greens. And they are all kind of existing on the same tonal category, so they live together nicely. And they're going to give us a certain sense of vibrancy and activity without having so broad a spectrum that it feels like a rainbow. Once you hit a rainbow, you hit what we call the kindergarten dynamic. And if you feel like it's something that could represent a kindergarten classroom, you kind of break down your professionalism. So how do you get vibrancy without getting the kindergarten spectrum? So that's kind of what we landed with colors. So then from there, we started to look at the typeface. Now, typeface is the kind of thing that people don't spend a lot of time thinking about most of the time. It's kind of like you open up your computer, it's like, okay, I have 120 different fonts. Challenge accepted. I will use every single one of them. And that lack of consistency starts to be realized in our long-term implementation. So what I did was I landed on a 3 typeface palette. The first is it's called a slab serif. It's a very traditional typeface. It's got several different weights to it, which I always like about a typeface. I like ones that can be thin or can be thicker. Allows us to have the right kind of weight at the right time. This is the typeface that is selected with your name in mind. So what does Trenton look best in? And that's what I selected for that. Our secondary typeface is called a sans serif typeface. I learned in college that sans serif means it doesn't have doohickeys. The technical term. So the thing that's interesting about sans serif is sans serif typefaces are actually designed to be content neutral. They're designed to not have personality. They're actually designed to be able to be good communicators without trying to communicate personality. And it's kind of interesting, most of you have probably heard of the typeface Helvetica before. It's on everybody's computer. It's a very, very normal typeface. Well, Helvetica, that's the typeface for Bloomingdale's. It's the typeface for Jeep. It's the typeface for Crate and Barrel. All these different multi-million, if not billion-dollar brands who have a typeface that everybody has on their computer. So this idea of mixing something that has a little character and something that's character neutral, that gives us the opportunity to be clean, to be contemporary, to look like an economic development engine when it's appropriate. And then we selected an accent typeface. Now this accent typeface is a script. It again has 3 different weights. Scripts are hard to read. That's okay sometimes, but that's why I put it as an accent typeface. A lot of times what happens is we go through this process in our mind, our community is attractive, a script looks pretty, let's use that. But nowadays I always get the question, well, can you really use that? Our kids don't learn cursive anymore. Like, believe it or not, I've got an 8-year-old, she can read. So it's working, but you do have to understand, when you use a script, it is hard to read. You're not going to put that on signage, but you're going to take it in those places where you want somebody to stop, slow down, and pay a little bit more attention. So it's the perfect thing for your tagline. It's the perfect thing for some of that more human scale interaction. So this is what we start to see your name in that primary typeface. Very handsome. It's got this great kind of weight to it in all caps and creates a really nice connection between the letters, nice spacing. You don't have anything that really makes it difficult to work with. Sometimes you have letters that just don't feel like they fit, and that does make it hard, but you guys have a really, really great name. So then from there with our graphics, I think one of the things that we really leaned towards was we were pleased with how often we heard the phrase 5 points, how often we heard reference to the flagpole. Now, I will say, when you analyze the city's logo, trying to figure out a way to bring 5 streets together and a vertical flagpole all in the same place, it can be kind of hard. They've done it pretty well. I'm going to show you a kind of an evolution of this for the city government. But I didn't want to try to replicate this for the community. I really like this idea of the 5 points, the 5 different paths coming together, the 5 different roads, all these intersections. Like, that's a thing that really is a great image of community, people crossing paths. So that kind of led us in to this whole idea, tie together the colors, tie together the inspiration, tie together the 5 points in what we have, historic Trenton, where everything comes together. So now you have these 5 streets that converge to create this 5-pointed star. You have these 5 different colors from your palette with that gold of the community spirit in the middle. Very clean, very handsome. You can kind of see it simplifies down so that you can have this kind of primary logo system with that simple phrase come together. What better what better phrase for a community that's got all these roads wrapped on top of each other than, hey, meet me right here. So there's a lot of great stuff with that concept. Now, what's beautiful about a system like this is you can start to look at it. Once you have this typeface and icon system, they give you a lot of different expandability. So whether you have a stacked version that's a little bit more vertical, you can integrate that circular icon into the O. You can do more of a smaller version that's running horizontal or a full stack over here. It's not about picking one. This is about having the right elements of your closet so you can build the wardrobe you need. And that's what's really, really nice about these. So again, just kind of continuing through with that, being able to make sure that it works on dark colors, make sure that it works on light, and then even exploring how it works in single color and seeing that that system really starts to work. Now, that gives us this idea of the destination brand and kind of replaces that tool that maybe the community didn't really have before. We had a bunch of organization brands, but we didn't necessarily have anything that was this shared basket for building value in historic Trenton. But then that leads us into the organization. So with the organization, I am always a big fan of making sure that the organization looks clean, that it looks like an economic development engine. I also, with our Main Street organizations, I think it's really, really important for us to tie in and kind of use 4 colors to help tell that 4-point approach. So, not a complete departure from the brand, but this interesting little evolution where now all of a sudden we're using these 4 colors to talk about the 4 points. Our blue represents design, our red represents promotion, our green represents economic vitality, our gold represents organization, and we start to have this system that kind of ties in, but it's still different enough that it's not forcing the community to use your organization logo to tell the story. One of the most important things on this page is that one right in the middle that says powered by Main Street. One of the biggest issues that we have, and I think that it's fair to say, you're a community where your organization has a long history, but if we go out and ask the general citizen about awareness, I don't know that the awareness is very high. They might or might not have heard of Main Street. They might or might not have heard of TDIA. They might or might not be confused about what is what, what are those letters, how do they relate to Main Street. So being able to send this clear message about the things that you're doing, from facade grants to events, connecting those dots to your brand from an organizational standpoint is really, really important. And we do believe that it is very, very important with the strength of Missouri Main Street Connection to tie your identity to this statewide network of support, infrastructure, and resources. So with this, what you can start to see is kind of how that might make its way into some of your collateral materials. We had a great conversation where we kind of heard this observation, and this is pretty universal, of, you know, it's one thing to be sitting in meetings and talking about plans and talking about what we can do to make the place better, but it's a whole nother thing when our board is actually going out and supporting our businesses. It is very, very important for our faces to darken the door of our downtown businesses. And that's why we started to create what we call impact cards. You can produce a stack of these cards. You can see they have a blank where board members can just kind of write their name. You just give a stack of these to every board member. And then every single time they're in a business, they're just writing their name and leaving it behind. Leave it on the table for the server. Leave it on the counter for the owner to see. Like, it doesn't matter. It's all about reinforcing the impact. We're fighting this fight every day on the ground by being part of the economy. It's not enough just to plan. We got to be part. We have to participate. Does that make sense? I really, really like tools like this because I feel like they're very simple, low-cost ways to hammer home impact. So then from there, we talked a little bit about the city. So you can kind of see this would be considered a very sensitive evolution of that city brand. It would allow the city to maybe adopt something that feels a little bit cleaner, a little bit more contemporary, but it's so tied to the original that they would never feel compelled to replace anything where that already exists. That's always important with our municipalities. So again, just kind of seeing how that works. Now, where it starts to get fun is with what we call brand extension. Brand extension is where you take those fundamental parts of the toolkit and you start to apply it to all these different interactions with the place. Now, one of the most obvious places is with our events. So, 5 Points Festival. You've got some really, really great stuff. I essentially took the inspiration of what you're using now, integrated in some colors and typeface, and showed where you can adapt that brand without really feeling like you're changing anything. Sip and stroll. You know, again, starting to build adaptations of that icon, adaptations of that circular format, adaptations of those 5 things that come together. You know, I don't know, sip and stroll. Maybe there's a challenge, 5 glasses in 5 hours. I mean, whatever you want to do. I do think that one of the things you'll see is, I think that this idea of your 5 points, you know, it's been very much kind of top of mind of something that evokes pride because it's unique. But you need to make sure that you're integrating it into your brand. Every time you can reinforce 5, do it. And you'll kind of see some of that. Now, I took a little bit of a different spin because you had this sip and stroll, but then you had this beer, this brewfest, right? You know, but if they're pretty much the same concept with different libations, then it's okay to create like a derivation. You can create a stroll series. So you can do a whiskey stroll. You know, you can do a beer stroll. You can do a sip and stroll. All of those things can kind of build in to this expanded system. But if you remember back to our promotion training, these should be our retail promotions. These should be the goal where you're getting people to visit multiple stores. And what is beer? It's called lubricant, right? Like the goal is to make transactions. So being able to kind of fit that in, and the nice thing about the stroll is it helps to kind of denote this multiple stop experience. So then from there, you've got downtown dollars. Now, we had a chance to talk a little bit about the Christmas festivities, and I'm always hesitant to change anything about Christmas because there's so much holiday tradition built up into that. But I will say, typically the way that we do our Christmas events is we slam everything into a really, really crazy day that ends up being so busy that the people participating in the day aren't really spilling over into being as much of a customer as maybe they could be. So one of the things that I was thinking is maybe you could think of this kind of 5 nights of Christmas and looking at how you do things, whether this is like you have a promotion that starts and leads to Small Business Saturday, or maybe you pick up after Small Business Saturday and run 5 days to the Christmas tree lighting the first Friday of December, something like that. But then what you're doing is you're doing small incremental events that keep bringing people downtown. And the nice thing about the event is, think about it just conceptually. Downtown dollars. It has no real start or end from the name. It kind of feels like, oh, well, that sounds like a program that would just happen all holiday season. Maybe it's a gift certificate program. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. 5 Nights of Christmas has an urgency to it. Has a start and an end. It has like a defined sense of participate or you will miss it. And I think that that's kind of interesting. So again, this is really food for thought from a programmatic standpoint. Just throwing some things out there. But you can see, what did we do? We pulled that star out of the icon, and that star becomes the star on top of the tree. So finding those ways to kind of take the brand and extend it. Now, we heard about your revolving loan fund. And I will tell you, revolving loan fund is not necessarily the sexiest name, right? So figure out a way to own that. You know, you have this mechanism. We have a low interest revolving loan fund. Oh, that's awesome. Let's talk about it. No, call it flagpole fund. Why? Because it's alliteration and people love the letters matching. You know, I don't care what you call it whatever you want to call it, but you know, think about owning that. In that same vein, we heard about Facade Grant. Own that. You know, is it a Facade Grant? Are you going to expand it out to be a vibrancy grant? Is it going to be about activity and color that makes its way out of the, like, think about how you want to position it and then brand it. My God, you're giving away money. You deserve to be getting brand equity and community awareness from that. Does that make sense? And then as you start to think about new events that you might roll in, I mean, when you have a holiday that literally celebrates the 5th, you kind of have to celebrate that in the home of 5 points, right? And I don't know, again, like, you might or might not have passed the ability to walk around downtown with a beverage. And a margarita stroll could be a beautiful thing, right? Right? So, yeah, there we go. We don't have to suggest anything else. Margarita stroll, it is. So, again, what you start to see, and hopefully you're starting to feel this, through the creation of a system, it starts to make decisions easier for you. It's almost like, oh my God, do we really want our committee to spend 3 meetings figuring out what the logo is going to be? Or isn't it nice to have a system that has enough constraints that we can just sit down and immediately jump to being strategic? Now, when you start to see this, obviously you start to see a lot of different logos with a lot of different character, but they start to tie in with one another. They start to build connectivity through all the things that we do, with the goal of heightening awareness and heightening the connection that people have with the place. Now, in addition, we just kind of hit on some things. Y'all got these really interesting small banners here. Your banner size and proportion are a little smaller than others. So just kind of showing some ways. The design committee has been working on some of these, and I'll be honest, they shared with me the current design. It's very, very attractive. You could go through and essentially use some of the same concepts, change out some of the colors, and be good to go. But just showing how you could integrate that icon into those type things. Now, these are called guerrilla wayfinding signs. These were born out of a master's project from a student in Raleigh, North Carolina, who went and designed all of these signs that were all pedestrian and bike oriented. He produced them, and he went out in the dark of night and put these signs up all over Raleigh. Now, they looked so attractive and professional that everybody at the city of Raleigh thought a different department must have been responsible for it. So they were up for like 6 weeks before the city realized they were unsanctioned signs. Well, of course, the city took them down, and the community just was in an uproar. Demanded that they come back. The city went back and produced them on metal signs and put them all throughout the community. These are really great ways to create connections. These can be super, super low cost. I actually suggest that you look at producing these on corrugated plastic. Like, we're not talking about hundreds of dollars a piece like a typical sign, if not thousands of dollars. We're talking about tens of dollars a piece, and they're literally just zip tied onto poles. Easy. It's very, very easy. But you see, it focuses in on connectivity. You know, 5-minute ride to the world's best tenderloin sandwich, 3-minute ride to a flagpole in the middle of it all. Be conversational, be fun, be specific to you. And then from there, like merchandise, being able to create things that people might want to wear, all different designs of shirts and things like that. Give it to the business community. Allow them to make the things that they think their customers will want. And then one of the beautiful things, again, with this simple icon is it has a lot of expandability. Being able to go through, and now all of a sudden, you put that icon as the O in the word shop, and you own the concept of shopping. That is so, so very powerful for our communities. So then from that, I know I've showed you a bunch of stuff. I also think it's important to share implementation ideas. So one of the things that we've given you is, first of all, we've created a full implementation checklist. This is everything that a community needs to think about as they start to roll out a comprehensive brand strategy. So you'll have all of this to sit down, dig into. We've created a how to be a brand partner page. This is intended to share with your other community organizations and business owners and event organizers so they can know how they might be able to take advantage of this. We've shared with you a strategic event calendar tool where you can go through and plan out, make sure that you have everything that you do mapped out on this calendar, identify whether it's an image building event, a special event, or a retail promotion, and then even talk a little bit about some of the audiences that you communicate to with those. And then also a communication channels analysis for your Main Street organization. So you can go through and create an inventory of all the ways that you communicate and who you're using or who you're communicating to with those, okay? And then finally, we've also created what we call Brand Score. Brand Score is a self-scoring tool that allows you to score your own implementation. Has nothing to do with design, has everything to do with how much you're using it. You can sit there and score yourself once a year, see how your score goes up. The scores are all based off of the things that we think are most important, and we actually give lower scores to things that are more expensive. Because for some reason, Whenever we do branding, the things communities want to jump to is wayfinding signage. The most expensive task and the task that requires you to work with MoDOT. It's like, of all the things you can do, don't pick the hardest, most stressful, most frustrating one as the lead out the gate. So this helps you to really kind of prioritize and identify low-hanging fruit. So we will give all of that to you as PDFs. You can dig into them, you can print them out. Now, in addition to that, everything that you saw today, it becomes yours. It's yours to use however you want. I will save each and every logo that I showed you in 5 different file formats. I'm gonna create a comprehensive style guide document, identifies the colors, identifies the type, tells you how to use it. It's about a 12-page document. And then all resources will be shared directly to you through a single web link, and you can share that link with any community partner. This is completely and totally yours. The copyright now transfers over to the Main Street organization, and it is yours to use as you see fit. Make sense? All right, so that's my stuff, and now we're going to hear a little bit from Jim about economic vitality.
Thanks, Ben.
Nice shirt.
It has really been a pleasure to get to know your town. And the pride, when we started talking about 5 points and the flagpole, and knowing that that was sacred ground was really important for us. That's you. And now we feel part of you by being here. And what was interesting is doing what I do, I start digging into the numbers and try to figure out what is the story that makes Trenton Trenton. Which things do we hang on to, and which things do we acknowledge, and then try to figure out how to amend those. You notice I didn't say change, because sometimes we just need to change attitudes. So we're amending that. Not always true, but we can start changing attitudes and demonstrating how you all love this place. It was fun walking up and down the street, getting into as many businesses as we could. The attitude of the businesses that we talked to was not about which stores are vacant, which buildings are vacant, and demolition by neglect is true here. They pointed to the ones that were occupied, and isn't it cool that we've got this new store? And it was like, I really want to grab onto that, but remember, in the back of our minds, we've still got to address some of those items that we can't allow to stay the same way they've always been, okay? So, as we do this, I started thinking about some of the key statistics that really stood out to me from an outsider looking at just your numbers, okay? And age was one of the first things, knowing that you have a college here and that some of the students do live in the community. It was interesting because I started seeing the median age of 44.2 surprised me. So just to give you a little context, the state of Missouri, these are current numbers, 2021. State of Missouri's median age is 39.6, the US is 38.5. In rural communities, it does tend to be a little bit on the higher side. You're even a little on the higher side of that. So let's acknowledge that, okay? A couple of the other things. Median income. Just a little less than 42,000 for every household, okay? So the state of Missouri is approaching 57,000, and then the US is approaching 65,000. So we know, so based on this, and then the median age, we know there's a certain segment of fixed income, right? Let's acknowledge that. And so how can we attract working families that want to live here? And then we start thinking about things like, this one jumped off the page at me. The trends in housing after the pandemic. I like to say after because we're over, right? No. Housing has really changed a ton across the country, especially in the Midwest, okay? Prices have all ballooned. Not so much here, which is, we need to track this. So what the statistics are telling us is the median home value, $92,000. In my travels prior to the pandemic, okay, there was 100 in rural in the Midwest. And these numbers are updated and you're still less than what it was pre-pandemic. So is there a real effort for us to focus on improving owner-occupied homes? As I drive around your community, there is a need to improve. It's not just focusing on vacant. And then the last part about housing, that this one really jumped off the page at me. So in 2010, when we're looking at your last census numbers, there was about a 13% vacancy recorded at census time, okay? Well, that meant 401 homes were vacant in your city limits, and it's like, wow. Then with the update that we just ran, that increased to 100. So you're 500 homes. So digging in a little deeper, those are vacant. What scares me is they don't have a definition on why they're vacant. Many of those, the biggest percent, are not for sale and not for rent. And so why? Are they dangerous and dilapidated? I know the city's working on trying to figure out how to address those one home at a time. When it's a home that can't be occupied, okay, it's a liability. It's only an asset for the city when we can remove that. And so working on programs, and I have some examples that I'll be able to get to you on how can we address some of those things. But this is truly a baby step process, okay? So what was interesting then to me, I'm gonna put this all together in a market snapshot so you'll be able to have it as a 2-page document. You'll be able to use it, and this is just a point in time, okay? So the cool thing is everything we do, building toward improvements for Trenton, is gonna make these numbers better, right? Now we have a job to do. So when we started looking at spending patterns, what's really, really cool and what you need to all be very proud of is you're still a retail destination for this region. And I think it's beyond the county. Yeah, maybe your trade area doesn't go very far south because of the sea town, okay? I was told not to talk about that one. In one of my business visits. But you have people that are regularly driving here, and you have a surplus in sales of over $10 million in your city limits. That's super cool. Okay, so how can we expand on that? And then looking at this, Ben and I were talking about it from an inflow-outflow standpoint. You have about 1,400 people that live here, choose to live here, and drive outside the city limits to work every day. But the other thing that jumped off the page at me is people that live outside the city limits and drive here every day is 1,600. So there's 200 extra people. So I start thinking in my little brain, you know, what if there was an appropriate housing inventory, and what if only 10% of those people would really like to not have to drive to work anymore and would choose to live in Trenton if the house was right, okay? It's all about the inventory. 10%, if you had 16 new families moved to town, Wouldn't that be cool? And I think these are the baby steps that we want to work towards, okay? Scott, I'm giving you a lot of work to do too. So, beyond the market snapshot that we'll produce for you, we want to give you the tools. It's time for you to start working on a starting business guide. This is one that we really think, Ben designed this for you so that you could fill in the inside pieces. How do I call the city? How do I get my electric and gas turned on? Where does water at? What are all the marketing tools that we can use to try to get somebody to open a business here, okay? This is truly the first step in working toward what's all the information that anybody that has lived here any amount of time would likely know, but we're also marketing to new residents. It's a one-stop shop if I want to start a business, and how can I do that, okay? The second piece that we really want you to really focus on then is working toward business recruitment. It's, you have buildings, okay? Love what you've done with the building and business inventory that you've done. It's time now, the mapping that you did, it's time now to blow that up. Maybe a printer would know how to do that. Get it on a big piece. Now, as soon as you do that, it's going to be obsolete. Somebody's going to move out or move in, right? So big deal. Okay, let's keep that up to date. Let's talk about that. And then, here's like the elephant in the room, okay? You guys ready for this? So I started looking at all your past studies, and thank you for sharing all those. RDG did a study, and then the Dream Report, and then your current building and business inventory. So dumb little Jimmy T, I start looking at the common themes of all of these reports, and they're all good. Please keep those as reference, and the information in there is golden. But what I started seeing, the majority of the vacancies that were identified in the RDG report are still vacant today. We have problems with some of our current building owners, okay? You're not gonna always solve those by creating incentives. So I'm gonna share some tools that we can get to the city, minimum maintenance ordinances, vacant building registry kinds of ordinances that we can talk about, okay? Inappropriate use includes storage, and I'm a big proponent. If I own this building, I have my own property rights until I start hurting the value of the buildings next to me. That is not fair, and that's happening in Trenton, okay? There are people that are hurting your downtown and hurting the value of neighboring buildings. And we've got to figure out what's going to make them tick. Even if it means, if you'll never fix this up, what's it going to take for us to get it in favorable hands so that they can? That's really going to be a major baby step kind of a process. This is where I talk about one building, one business at a time. Please don't feel defeated if you don't change it all overnight, because you're not. It's been this way for decades now, okay? If you don't believe me, go back and read those former reports. It's all captured in there, and we've got a challenge. But I think that it's time that we do an available properties map and list. So that's different than what you just did. So you did a building and business inventory. We're now gonna focus on just the ones that are underutilized or vacant. And that's a separate map, and I do want you to blow it up too. And then you'll start working on property cut sheets that say, this is who you contact if you're interested in this building. So don't try to be a realtor, don't try to be a banker or a broker, but that takes a conversation with that property owner. Would you ever consider selling this? Can we send people to you that might buy it? Okay? I looked at, and here, I'm shaking my head, folks. I'm looking at, is it Davis Paint? So legally, there's a responsibility for a property owner that takes down a building, or if it falls down, that when you expose a party wall, which was an interior wall, now has to be treated as an exterior wall. And that's generally a property owner that caused the problem. Talk to your city attorney, okay? That's the way this works. And so what I would rather do is, let's talk to the owner of that building to say, instead of worrying about that, why don't we just fix up the exterior wall that you own? Okay? That's really the way for us to address this. Why let it fall down? Because it's going to. If you look at some of those buildings, that's going to be the problem. But business visitation then is where you actually go out and talk to people. I love the cards that Ben produced. I think it's a great way to get out there and talk to people and really expose what Main Street's all about. Okay, this is a new day. Frankly, I would hope you all would agree that with this visit, we're gonna draw a line in the sand. We're gonna acknowledge what is and work toward where we wanna go. And that's what this is. So supplemental data that you will gather when you visit with them. This is a great way for committee members, board members. What's really the vacancy rate? What's the vacancy rate? What's going on with leasing? Would you lease this if somebody wanted to buy it? Wanted to occupy the space? How many housing units do we have? We heard that there's some really nice improved housing units in town. Looks great. Maybe it's time then for that upper story tour. Let's show off what we have. Maybe show off some gut rehabs that need to happen to inspire somebody to fix them up. There are examples in your town of people buying buildings and paying them off because of the upper story housing. Okay, let's talk about those stories. These are real things that happen. And then one of the last things is really working toward this incentive guide. What can you do to help provide resources for existing businesses? So as you're working through recruitment, we're all gonna work together on try to maximize those. In our discussion with the city, I'm also gonna say this is another opportunity to draw a line in the sand. In the Main Street world across the country, we're used to cities having a participation or partnership agreement with Main Streets locally and with Missouri Main Street Connection. There are some wonderful examples of that in the state. If you want others, we'll get them for you. But I think about things like the Facade Grant. The city reaps a lot of benefit and doesn't participate in those. It's time for them to step up, okay? And it's like, can we grow that $5,000 Facade Grant to now $10,000 because the city's helping? Or could we say an application could be $15,000 and the property owner puts in 5, the city puts in 5, Main Street puts in 5. You can accomplish a whole lot more, okay? So we're trying to maximize what happens. It's time for the city to be a major player in what happens with Main Street too, okay? That needs to be really evident with an incentive guide, because they want this, they should want this to happen. They get a return on investment based on property taxes also, so why wouldn't you invest in that, okay? Now, is it Ben or Keith?
Do you want to talk about that one?
Oh, first part?
What you did.
Cause they gotta see this.
Sure, I'll tell you. So,
Ben likes to play an architect.
well, I do. So in your next visit, Keith is gonna bring Randy Wilson, and Randy is, he's the Main Street architect for the state of South Carolina. And he's my best friend, and, so I always kind of make fun of him and do his work for him before he comes. So, one of the beautiful things that he's gonna do is he's gonna come in and he's gonna develop some photo renderings of building reinvestment and building restoration for you. So, one of the things that we took a look at was, obviously, we had a fantastic lunch yesterday at Uprooted. When you walk into Uprooted, there's this initial shock that you don't expect the inside to be like that. Because the outside, honestly, I mean, I don't mean it as a disrespect, like, the outside is not an indicator of what the inside is.
Or you drive by it when you roll into town and didn't know it was a restaurant.
Right. So, what we wanted to do, we kind of used them just as a quick example, because we did have a chance to talk to one of the owners yesterday as we were eating, and just kind of felt like this would be good. They talked a little bit about some of their potential plans of renovating the second floor. They even talked about possibly being able to use that and kind of pitch that as a rental apartment for students and things like that. So, what you'll see when you go through that design training is kind of an image of what it looks like now, and then a photo rendering of what that could look like. And you just see a couple different elements. First of all, you see a cornice return to it. And that cornice is that component at the top of the building. There's something really, really important that happens where the building meets the sky. And that is why there's this ornamentation and fenestration at the top. It's a very, very kind of important part of that relationship to building and space. So reclaiming that is really important. Now, those of you that have been here a while, I can tell by looking at the building that it actually used to have brick detail that extruded out. And all of that brick detail got shaved and chiseled off. And my assumption is the only reason that they ever do that is if they slip cover it with metal. So I'm guessing that the building probably had some sort of slip cover at some point. Does that?
It did.
Okay. And you can kind of also see with some of the stripping and that kind of stuff, typically that kind of tells you that. Now, in addition to that, you see restoration of some of the windows on the front. The 3 front ones still need to be done. And then being able to do kind of a ghost sign inspired kind of top band where you tell what happens in the business. There's already a really cool ghost sign right here. Can't really make out what it is, but preserving that is important. You can, with a building that has brick in this condition, it's probably going to be okay to paint it. And typically, you don't really want to paint it because brick needs to breathe, but I think that this is going to be okay. Adding in an awning to protect against sun, and then having this kind of sign for this upper floor housing that just says "Live Up." So you have Uprooted and then Live Up, which is the upstairs. So, just kind of thinking through that, being able to show the community what good looks like, and doing it in a way where it doesn't come off as critical to the building owner. Obviously, this building owner is invested in the community. They believe in this place and they're putting their money where their mouth is. So hopefully this can be kind of an inspirational guide for them. Sometimes you will select properties because you almost need to show how much needs to be done for it to be good, to maybe have the current owner think about, maybe I shouldn't be the owner of this anymore. Maybe not this building, but there are other buildings in town that, maybe the people that own it, it's time for them to sell. And it's easy to sit on something if the expectation is no action. But we like to be able to give these graphics and kind of give a little bit of sneak peek of what it could look like, and that'll be something that Keith and Randy will get to work on.
Yeah, so we're gonna bring Randy back in February, and so I talked with Megan this morning about maybe a process that you guys could follow to do that. You have a Facade Grant program, so maybe we marry up the photo renderings with the Facade Grants. So people apply for the process, they get a photo rendering, and now they've got a guide then for implementation and some dollars for implementation through your Facade Grant program. So Randy will do 3 renderings. So, you know, like you guys talk about that as who manages the Facade Grant? Design committee? Yep, so design committee talk about it. We have some recommendations for some buildings that, you know, really could make a big impact within your community. They're very prominent buildings based upon their location or the amount of alterations that have been made. You know, taking that off would be a huge impact to your downtown. And so, you know, we have our recommendations, but the other side of the coin is we also want people that are gonna take that photo rendering and do something with it. You know, whether it's adopt all of it or adopt parts of it. We want someone, if we're gonna do a photo rendering, we want something that people that are gonna go and implement pieces and parts and hopefully all of it. But those are our recommendations. So the guys will put together quick reports. Ben will, and we'll give you guys a couple weeks if you want to look at is there any tweaks you need to the logos, those sorts of things, or if they're good to go. He'll roll all that up into what he talked about, the brand guidelines, and put all the logos together. We'll give you the link for that, and you guys run with it. Jim, we're going to work with a little bit more on the business recruitment side, starting with that, giving you the kind of the outer sheet of the Start a Business Guide. You guys start filling that in. And then we want to do a checkup in about 3 months, do it virtually, and with the EV committee and the board, and come back and then start helping you build then the recruitment guide piece. So we've got the cover, but now we need to start talking about how to put together the stuff to go on the inside. And then also during that time period, we'll work on the other piece that as part of the service is agreements, partnership agreements. And so we'll start developing that out. But this is also going to give us pieces and parts that then maybe is our request to those partners we're looking at. You know, hey, we want to enhance our Facade Grant program, and so we need a partner to help us do that. As Jim mentioned, maybe that's the city. You know, and so all of that's kind of being built at the same time. Okay, does that make sense? Any questions for these 2 gentlemen? Actually, I will say one last thing, is that we are recording this too, and so we'll upload it to YouTube so anybody who couldn't be here, and we'll share the presentation with you guys. So, yes, Jackie?
Question, comment, I guess. We really struggle getting our city government to feel our urgency to address these building issues. And I mean, we have to tell them and try to push, and it doesn't go very far. What can we do? How can we get them to understand the importance of them taking action on these derelict buildings? And our college, we feel like we're preparing a pathway, a gateway to our campus.
Absolutely.
And how you can get those people to understand that.
So you haven't had a building collapse yet? That normally creates a sense of urgency.
We have some,
It does, yeah.
we have some that are on the dangerous list that are supposed to be demoed, but no time frame. I mean, they just kind of hang around and,
Right.
you know, there's just no urgency about it and no appreciation of the need.
What's always tough to handle, so I wasn't a city council person forever, but I did it for 10 years, okay, in a town about this size.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because simple little tweaks like, and I'll get to the buildings downtown, but we'd have a house that there was a fire, okay? And then it would be demoed, and we'd be so quick to split it with the 2 neighbors, and they'd expand their yards. Until this light bulb goes on, and it's like, so what really is our expense as a city? Well, we have to mow it and we have to scoop the snow, okay? But if we hold on to that for a period of time, decide, some towns it's 2 years, sometimes it's longer, and we'd agree to do that, but every quarter we're gonna advertise, we'll accept requests for proposals. What do you wanna do with this? If all you wanna do is mow it, that gives us the least amount of return on investment from a tax-based side, okay? So can we figure out how to get a home on it? That's the best return on investment. Would you at least put like a oversized garage to put your RV in? Okay, that's the next. The last one is just mowing it. So really the delay is the city accepting the fact that, yeah, we're gonna pay somebody to care for this a little bit, but we're gonna control our own futures. Downtown is different though. When a building falls in disrepair or collapses and lands in the sidewalk, the last one standing is almost always city government, okay? And so now they're stuck with the property owner. What's that old saying? You can't get blood out of a turnip. You know, they walk away. So the city's saying, now I have to pay to demo this. And we're gonna have a pocket park or green space back to mowing it again.
No tax revenue.
No tax revenue, forever, okay? So that's why I love it when you can inspire cities to do the right thing because they should. Sometimes you have to show them that they have to do what they're responsible for. And don't wait till it's too late in the process, okay? And that's a hard, it takes baby steps, and I think about us being recorded. So we're not really saying that we're gonna encourage certain candidates to run, but I think it's really important for us to acknowledge, what do you stand for when you run?
Oh, gosh.